morning. Glad you guys all made it this morning. So after last night, we're going to change topics a little bit. We're gonna watch Mark sleep. Is that okay? So if you guys just keep it down, that would be fantastic. There we go. Oh yeah. Come on, be quiet, guys. Fine. I traveled all this way. Oh, maybe I should just do it from the floor. Wouldn't that be nice? Anyway, okay. I am Mark Bates, as we said. You know what, everybody, can everybody just stand up? Come on, we all had a long night. Everybody stand up. Let's get our blood flowing here. I stood up, you have to too. There we go. So little stretches, everybody stretches. Stretches, little twists, a few twists. Right, there we go, some deep knee bends, come on. Oh, look, everybody's struggling not to vomit. Everybody, there we go. Okay, so stay standing for a minute, so stay standing. I'm Mark Bates. I'm a consultant from America, so you can feel free and hire me, but only for consulting. So I am the author of these two books, Distributed Programming in Ruby and Programming in CoffeeScript. That would be these books here. I may have two of them to give away. Ooh. You didn't know you were going to get freebies, did you? This is what I look like when I get one of my books, so I expect you to look the same. I am the voice of a screencast series called Metacasts, which you can't really see on the screen very well. Use Pirate 13, get yourself a free month. It's awesome. Everybody should have their own screencast series. So when I came out to Belgium, I started doing a little research, and I was like, who is the most famous Belgian pirate? Because apparently that's the theme of this conference, and this is the best I could come up with. He's apparently the most famous Belgian pirate out there. Yeah, so my wife thought I would offend a lot of people with that picture. But I was like, who is offended by Jean-Claude Van Damme? The answer is nobody. He's awesome. Okay, so this morning we're going to take a big look at MiniTest. For those of you who don't know what it is, we're going to really dive deep in it. I warn you, there is a lot of code today, so be prepared for that. So the green dot. I absolutely love the green dot. And as Rubyists, you do too. Right, and stop. Striped shirt and pirate shirt, come here. You, the red with the striped shirt, come here. There you go. Ah, see, Simon didn't say sit down, did he? No, so that's what happens. Worst part is I do that at every talk I give, and like no one has caught on yet. Just stay standing and Mark will give you free shit. Anyway, so the green dot, I love the green dot. I'm a huge fan of the green dot. I would get down and dirty with the green dot if I possibly could. I would have a big picture of the green dot over my bed if my wife let me. Right? And I love the green dot. And as Rubyists, you all love the green dot too. I know you do. That's what makes this community so special, right? We love the green dot. We especially love a lot of green dots. Lots of green dots make us feel really warm and gooey inside, because that means we have a passing test suite. And a passing test suite means we can sleep better at night. It means we can drink more at night because we won't be on call at 3 in the morning to fix some random bug that shows up. It means our code is not going to regress. It means we can add new features easily. The green dot is awesome. I love it. Sorry, I'm getting a bit amorous over the green dot here. So the first step in any project I set up, and you should too, is to set up a testing framework. Right? Now, I have had a terrible, terrible thought when I hit step one of some projects, and I know other people have too, and I'll get to that in a second. That terrible thought is, I could write my own testing framework, how hard could it be? Right? And I beg of you not to do it. Please don't. So the reason why I know a lot of you have thought the same thing as I have is through a little site called the Ruby Toolbox. Is everybody here familiar with the Ruby Toolbox? Raise your hand if you've used the Ruby Toolbox. Oh, good. So everybody knows it. So the site was written by Christoph, last name I can't pronounce, big burly German fellow, drinks and smokes a lot. Awesome person. Buy him a beer. He maintains it. He also maintains SimpleCov and a few other projects. He's the dead serious on Twitter. Awesome. But you go there and you type in, say, unit testing frameworks, and you get something that looks like this, right? It kind of lists all the unit testing frameworks out there, or pagination libraries, tagging libraries, and gives you a lot of great information about it, when it was first released, when it was last released, what release it's on, when the last day it did it, all sorts of stuff, downloads. Really great way of measuring it. So I typed in unit testing frameworks for this talk to see how many unit testing frameworks were there and where does MiniTest rank. This was the list that came back. It's like 20 testing frameworks. I haven't heard of half of these. I've heard of the first 4, and then I've heard of Assert and Lemon and I don't know, and whatever. Are any of the BaconConf guys here? BaconConf guys, yeah. Yeah, see? Bacon. But today we're going to talk about one of them. We're going to talk about MiniTest. Right? And as we know, good things come in small packages. We know this with the Cooper Mini. Right? This is an awesome car. Everybody loves the Cooper Mini. Mini-Me, right? Also awesome. Those little bottles of booze you get in the plane, that when you hold them, you feel like a giant, and you go stumbling down the walkway, and you fall down and pass out, and they have to carry you off the plane. Or is that just me? No? Okay. And MiniTest. MiniTest is also small, hence its name. MiniTest comes in about 8 files, 8 or 9 files, but really actually boils down to 3 files, one of which just requires the other 2. Right? So it doesn't get any smaller than that. But yet it is incredibly full-featured, as we're going to see. So here is kind of a brief look at what a MiniTest looks like. So I'm requiring MiniTest at the top. I've got a little class here that I'm going to describe called foo, and I can describe it and test it, and all in this like one file here. For those of you who are masochists and love TestUnit, this is what the TestUnit variant of that same file would look like. But the really observant amongst you notice that not only does it look like RSpec or TestUnit, there are no gems. You didn't see me do bundler. I told you that was one file. You could take that file, copy it into your editor right now, and run it. The reason you can is because it ships with Ruby. Oh. Wow. Wake up, come on. Yes, it ships with Ruby 1.9 or greater. Right? So you already have everything you need in the standard library to write and test code. I know Peter did a great talk yesterday about the standard library and all the great hidden gems that are in it. And MiniTest is one of those gems. It's there, and I mean gems as in beautiful things, not gems as in gem install. But it's also available as a gem, so you can also gem install. The reason you would gem install it is to get the latest updates or versions and bug fixes and that sort of stuff, and then they get cycled back into the Ruby releases. But the nice thing is you can be on a plane and you can want to test a Ruby script. You don't need to do a bundle because you don't have a gem server. It's just right there. And it also has a very familiar syntax, as we saw very briefly and as we'll see over the course. It looks just like RSpec and TestUnit. In fact, MiniTest actually replaced TestUnit in Ruby 1.9. So prior to Ruby 1.9, TestUnit was in the standard library, and that is gone now. It's MiniTest. MiniTest for the win. So the basics. Let's talk about the basics. We're going to talk about both MiniTest Spec and MiniTest Unit for kind of the first half of the talk, where we go over the basics, and then we're going to drop MiniTest Unit like a hot potato because it looks stupid. Are there any TestUnit fans in here? Great, I shot all over you. Fantastic. I'll buy your drink later because you need it. So MiniTest Spec. Let's start there, right? So this is the basics of a MiniTest Spec. We have a describe block. We're going to describe something. And then inside that, we can add our expectations. Right? Now, if I showed you this right now, you'd probably think this is RSpec. Who uses RSpec? Brilliant. OK, I see a great disparity between those who use RSpec and those who use TestUnit. Who isn't testing their code? It's OK. We're in a comfortable setting. You can raise your hand. OK, those of you who aren't using either of those two, what are you using? OK, somebody's lying. There's about 20 hands of people who said they weren't using RSpec or TestUnit, but they test their code. So, OK, OK. Liars! I will find you and track you down. It's OK. You can admit you don't test your code. It's like testing Anonymous up here. We'll take you in, we'll cuddle you, we'll give you something warm to drink, and then we'll help you learn how to test. So anyway, back to TestUnit. So you can do before and after blocks, just like in RSpec. So you can do your setup and kind of tear down in these blocks, and they run before each of your tests. You can do nested describe blocks. So describe, user's controller, and then, describe logged in user and describe a non-logged in user, that kind of a scenario. You can do lets, just like you do in RSpec. So for those of you unfamiliar with the let syntax, what it lets you do is basically the first time you call the something keyword here, It goes, executes the block you gave it up here, and then memoizes it, so the next time you run it inside that same expectation, it just returns the same result. But then that gets cleared out for the next run, for the next test. So very nice, clean way of kind of doing factories and the like. You can also do, it also supports subject. So subject is just a shortcut to let. So all it does is create a let with the name of subject. Pretty kind of silly. In RSpec, you'll see this a lot. Instead of doing multiple describes, you'll see a context kind of in there. So again, the context would be not logged in or logged in. Unfortunately, if you run this, you get an error, then you get a no method error telling you that there is no such thing as context. So to get around that, we can just use Ruby, because Ruby's awesome. And we could just reopen up MiniTest Spec, alias off, describe to context, and we're fine. This is one of those things I keep meaning to submit a patch for, but I just never get around to it. I don't know why. So it's in my Rails template as opposed to being in MiniTest. I'll get around to it, I swear. Buy me a drink, and maybe I'll submit it later. So pending, it's sometimes very important to do pending tests. We can do pending tests in MiniSpec, don't worry. So again, we have our describe block here, and then we can just do kind of the it does something, don't give it a block, and then it'll run as a skip. It'll skip that test. You can also give it a block and use the word skip, or you can also skip with a string to kind of tell you a little bit more about what's happening there. I'm not a big fan of pending tests, to be perfectly honest. I think if you're using pending tests, it's kind of a cop-out, because A, your test probably doesn't work, and you put skip just to get your test suite to pass. Or you're kind of just stubbing things out, and you're like, oh, I'll get back to this later. Like, get back to it now. That's what test-driven development's all about. Just do it. So don't use skip, even though I showed it to you. And that's what it looks like when you run. So expectations, right? We all need expectations to test our code. MiniTest has a whole hell of a lot of them. They all start with must underscore. So must equal, it must raise, it must include. It's very decisive. That's what I love about it. It's not kind of pandering like RSpec does. It's like, oh, it should be equal. It should include. It's like, no, it must. And what's even better is the opposite of this, and I love it. It won't. It won't be there. It won't include this thing. It won't raise this argument. It won't raise this error. It's very assertive, and I like that. I like my test suite to be, and here's a kind of a little example of some of the different ones you can do. So MiniTest Unit. So for that one gentleman who loves his test unit, sorry, two. There are two who loves test unit. I'll buy you both beers later. All right, we can do that. We can create a MiniTest unit here. So all you got to do is you have to extend MiniTest Unit test case. That's a mouthful. Just like this. So you create a class called test something. And then inside of it, you do kind of your standard test unit thing where you create methods and they're test underscore, whatever it is you want to test. If you don't prefix them with the test underscore, they won't get run as part of your test. They're just regular methods. You can do setup and tear down just like you could before, very straightforward. You can do nested testing by, here's a regular test, and then you can nest it by creating another class underneath it. It's beautiful, isn't it? And why would you do that? That's a great question. I have no idea. I've seen people do it. That's why I put up here. I wouldn't. I would use the Scribe Blocks. Oh, so we're actually, that's one of the nice things you could do, actually, I said use the Scribe Blocks, is you can actually mix and mingle the two. So you could put a describe block in here if you wanted to. It's kind of cool. So unit test does have some downsides. It doesn't have let, which is kind of a drag. It doesn't have subject. So to do those types of things, you have to use instance variables in your setup and tear downs. It's kind of a drag. I think it's a bit of a, just makes your code look, But you can do pendings, just like we could before. And they look like this. Obviously, there's only two options because methods don't take the block. And you get something like that. The assertions on MiniTest Unit are the same exact assertions you get on Unit Spec, except they are of the assert variety. So you assert equal 1, 1, or 1, 2, and that won't match. And if you can remember which order they go in, I'll buy you another beer. Right? And you can assert this and assert that. And the opposite is to refute. So I refute equal 1, 2. I refute includes this thing. I don't know. It's really weird. That's the last time I'm going to talk about MiniTest Unit because it really bums me out. No offense. It's just, whatever. So mocking and stubbing. This is always a popular topic for Rubyists. And I'm not going to go into kind of, spend a long time with mocking and stubbing, because you can do a whole talk entirely on what you should mock, what you shouldn't mock. There are times when you need mocking and times when you shouldn't use mocking. MiniTest mocking coverage, however, is very, very basic. I'm not going to lie to you. Just like MiniTest, it is small and simple, effective, but small and simple. It kind of opts for a different approach, which we'll look at in a minute. So here is kind of a simple test, and inside of it here, I can create a MiniTest mock as part of my let. And then inside my test, I can say something expects name to return returns widget. Right, so now I can call something.name must equal widget. And at the end of my test, I have to verify that my expectations were met. Right, so I've told it to expect this name to be called and verify that it does get called. If I take out that verified statement, or sorry, the bit where I called name itself, and just have the expect and verify, I'll get a mock expectation error. It never actually got called, so therefore, why are you mocking it? Why are you telling it expect? It's kind of the equivalent of should receive, or yeah, it should receive in RSpec. I haven't used RSpec in ages. So the other thing it kind of offers you is the stub block. So it gives you a method on your object that you can call called stub, and you give it the name, the method you want to stub, so in this case name, and the value you want it to return, so thingy. And then everything inside of the block you give it will have access to that stub. Right, so inside my block, something.name must equal thingy. Outside that block, however, it'll go back to being widget, which is kind of useful. What MiniTest really tries to push you to do, and what I would also try and push you to do, is to use Ruby, use what's in the standard library to do your mocking. And there's a couple really great classes inside the standard library that do this very well. Struct and OpenStruct. They're they're really great mocking tools. And they're right there, no third parties, they're very fast, they're efficient, they're right there. This is kind of what they're meant for, is exactly this sort of thing. So if we look at these kind of examples again here, instead of creating a new something up in my let block, I create a new OpenStruct. Or I could create a new struct, whatever I want to. OpenStruct is a little quicker syntax in this case here. And then my tests will run just as it expected to before. I can also, what am I supposed to, oh yeah. I can also do, not necessarily some metaprogramming, but I can redefine the methods that I want to override as well. So here I can just, on that instance of my something class, I can just change the name method to be whatever I want it to be. And it's only on that instance. Like, this is all built into Ruby, it's right there. You don't need a special mocking tool to be able to stub out some of these methods and do what it is you want it to do. And do them, like I said, in the context of your test. However, if you really want to, there's Mocha, RR, FlexMock, whatever you need to use. I use Mocha sometimes when I really need some deep mocking tools. Just not often, but it's there. It's there for you to use, so feel free and pull those in. Custom assertion, there comes time in every tester's life where the thing they want to test is proprietary to their own domain, and so it's nice to kind of create little shortcut DSLs to write your tests. I always have one that's must render 404, and it checks the status code, make sure it renders the 404 template, that sort of thing, right? Here we're going to do a very simple one. We're going to assert that the rounding of 1.2 rounds to 1, and the rounding of 1.7 does not round to 1. Right? Very simple little test case here, but what I can do. So we start by opening up the MiniTest assertion module. Right? And in that module, we're going to shove our assertions. So the first thing we do is we create, unfortunately, a TestUnit style method of assert rounded equal, right? Assert equals rounded, sorry. That takes the round number and then the decimal number. So in our test case here, it'd take 1, 1.2, or 1, 1.7. Right? And then inside that, we put the assert. So we assert that the decimal, when rounded, equals the rounded number we expect, or vice versa, because it's test unit. And we give it a method, we give it kind of a string at the end if it fails. And we do the same thing for the refute. Right? Well, not the same thing, we change an equal to a bang and change the message a little bit, but you get the idea. Now that we have our kind of two methods that we want to use, our two custom assertions, this is it, by the way. This is a whole test, custom assertion here, much easier than an RSpec. We next need to actually put these on the object themselves. So now it makes no sense for these to be on string or arrays or hashes. Like, there's no reason for an active record model to be able to round to something, right? Although I'm sure DHH would find a way. So what we're going to do is we're going to put these on numeric, because that's where they make the most sense. And to do that, we call the infect and assertion method. I told you, it's very like brute force MiniTest. It's going to infect this assertion on this object, right, on this class. I love that. It's just so like intense. It's not pussyfooting about. It's like, oh, maybe we'll add it. No, it's we will infect you with our assertions. And there's no cure, so be wary. So we infect the assertion, we kind of give it the name of the method we want to infect. And then we kind of give it the opposite, the spec version of it as well. So the must round to or the won't round to. And once we do that, our tests now pass just as we expect them to. So that was adding a custom assertion. Very straightforward, very easy. So Rails, anybody use it? A few people. You guys are just liars this morning. Yeah, so Rails is this hip, new, trendy web framework that people are using. Because apparently no one in the audience uses, like 6 people use it here. So let me explain what Rails is. Really, people? There's 20 people who test their code and don't use any testing framework, which is amazing. And then 90% of you don't use Rails. Anyway, so for Rails, we can use MiniTest Rails. So in Rails 4, MiniTest Unit is there, because Ruby 1.9 uses it. So it's already kind of baked in a little bit. Unfortunately, they originally had support for MiniTest Spec in there, and they dropped it because TurboLinks. I don't know. That's whenever I need something to shit on, I just go straight to TurboLinks. Who needs a queuing API? TurboLinks! Anyway, so you use gem MiniTest Rails, and that will add a bunch of kind of controller helpers and like to your Rails test. And it'll also set up really nice rake tasks for you. So you do the generator, and you get a test helper file that looks something like this, just a couple requires. There's a few things you can add to this test helper file that I recommend you do. First thing is you can reopen test case, and you can add your kind of before and after blocks there. So it's the equivalent to config.before and config.after in RSpec, where you could set up time cop and database cleaner and all that sort of stuff that run before every test suite, right, before every test. The other thing I would also do is I would also add these assertions straight into your expectations. Right? So these are assertions on response. So must redirect to, must render template, must respond with. I don't like to do response.must render template. I just like to do must render template. So by infecting these straight into MiniTest expectation, I'm able to do that really easily. So just, I don't know, it's a convenience thing I like to do. I also put my little context ascribe hack in here as well. So I told you get like about 6 test tasks to go with this. They're all kind of interesting. Some run just the model, some run just the lib, some run the controllers. The one that you really want to be interested in is MiniTest all quick. So when you run MiniTest, what it does is it runs your models, and then it runs your controllers, and then it runs your helpers, and then it runs your lib or whatever. And it kind of groups them all really nice. The problem with that is it's incredibly slow, because it spends so much time grouping them and then printing them and doing all sorts of stuff. So to get around that, if you use MiniTest all quick, it just grabs every test and runs it. And it runs it all in random order, too. You can force it to go in parallel order, but you should not do that. If your tests require parallel order, you've done something wrong. Go back and fix them. So so what I like to do is I actually like to kind of alias off MiniTest all quick to MT, because it's a whole hell of a lot quicker to write. And then I actually like to get rid of the default Rails rake task, which I believe runs MiniTest all, or just MiniTest when you add MiniTesting, and just run my MT rake task. So now when I just type rake, it runs my MiniTest all quick, really, really fast. Right? You can run individual tests in Rails. Now you can do this in Ruby, obviously. So when I showed the earlier code slides, I didn't show how to run them because they're just pure Ruby, so you just run them with Ruby. But in Rails, you kind of have to add this little extra step of including your test directory. And that's because at the top of your file, you're probably doing require test helper, and that helps set up the path. Right? But again, just pure Ruby, you don't need anything special. You don't need a special runner, although we will look at one in a minute that I really enjoy using. And here is an example of a controller test. I didn't feel like showing a model test because it looks just like all the other tests I've shown you. But here you can see that just like in RSpec, whatever you get index, and then must render template index, or must redirect to feed path, whatever. Right? So this is pretty quick, pretty easy drop-in kind of replacement for MiniTests, for RSpec. I would not, however, and I usually get this as an FAQ, I would not throw away all of your RSpec tests and switch straight over to MiniTest. If you already have a test suite, continue using that test suite. Do not go and change it all and rewrite it all to MiniTest. However, when you start a new project, I would highly recommend MiniTest. Guard, does anybody use Guard here? Fantastic, good, good, good. Who has heard of Guard? Awesome, okay. For those of you who don't know Guard, who also don't know Rails and don't know about testing frameworks, I'm not sure, yeah. For those of you who don't know Guard, what it does is it'll listen to file system events, and when a file changes, it goes and looks for a mapping in your Guard file, and then executes something based off of that. So when I wrote the CoffeeScript book, for example, every time I changed one of my code examples, it would convert the CoffeeScript to JavaScript, it would run it through Node, get the output, store them all in files, and then include them into, then it would go and build the actual chapter that it was in the suitable format for my publisher. All in the background just while I was typing. Never had to leave my editor, and it was building books for me behind the covers, right? Guard is fantastic. In this case, we can use Guard to run our tests. Right, so every time I save a model or save a controller or save a test, it runs the corresponding test appropriate for me in the background. Do not try and grok what this is doing. I put it in the slides so that later, if you're looking for a good Guard mini test, you go to the slides, you can just grab it out of there. So that's the only reason I put it in there. So gem M, I was talking with somebody the other day, and I said this is the only single character gem I use. Has anybody else heard of the M gem? M gem Lee has. So it is probably the only single character gem you'll ever use. Most of them were just taken for shits and giggles, but M is great. It was written by QRush, and it helps kind of alleviate a little bit of the weirdness around running MiniTest files. In particular, the big thing it does is that -I test for you, right? Does that, so you can just run M and then the name of the test you want to run and the file you want to run. It also gives you an extra feature that MiniTest doesn't have, which is the ability to run a test at a certain line. So typically when you run Ruby and then the test file, it runs the entire test suite. M lets you put colon and the line number at the end. Right? So here I can run tests, this test line number, whatever test is at line number 37, which is great. So I'd really recommend the M gem. It's also quicker than typing Ruby. And it's also quicker than doing Ruby-I test or Ruby-I spec, whatever way you like to lay it out. Capybara, rather. This is a big one. I get asked this all the time. Well, I love my Capybara tests. I do all my integration in them because Cucumber is terrible. And I use only Capybara, which is good. And how do I do this in MiniTest? Well, the answer is the MiniTest Rails Capybara gem. Matter of fact, MiniTest, when you generate that test helper, MiniTest Rails puts a little comment block at the top of the file that says, here's how you add in Capybara. It kind of gives you all the information you need right there. But I believe it does have a typo, and it doesn't work. So, so use my test helper file if you're trying to figure out how to do it, because it's correct. And once you include that, you get features, you get scenarios, you get all the nice Capybara features of being able to click around, visit and click on and fill in, and all that stuff is now available to you right inside your MiniTest files. So that's really, really nice. So again, we're not really losing a lot of functionality here. So to wrap up a little bit, right, we've got a familiar syntax to RSpec or TestUnit, whichever you prefer. I think you guys know what I prefer. It's about 95% of the feature set of RSpec in 3 files. So just think about that for a second when you're choosing your next testing framework, right? It is very lightweight. As we saw, it's quick, it's fast, it's easy, right? Here is when I do gem install RSpec. This is what shows up in my gemfile.lock. You get 5 gems. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Rails boot up time, what happens when you require a lot of files? Does anybody know? It goes like this. The more files you add, it's exponential, it just goes straight up. So if I can require 3 files versus 5 gems and God knows how many files, I have severely increased my Rails boot up time. And as you know, when you run tests, the test suite itself is almost inconsequential to the speed of your test to run it, right? Rails adds that 20, 25-second overhead to your test suite. So your tests run in 26 seconds because Rails took 25. So if we can cut down on the number of requires, then we have sped up our Rails test suite 5, 10 seconds. It's a very noticeable difference I found. So something to kind of keep in mind. Again, it ships with Ruby. You should definitely use the gem. I highly recommend using the gem. It's very good because it does add bug fixes and new features. But it does ship with Ruby. You can do this on a plane without an internet connection. You can start a new project and start coding and testing right there. It's very easy to test single-line scripts. Right? You don't need bundler, and you don't need to make sure the RSpec is installed. I do it all the time. I do inline scripts all the time. Here's a bunch of tests, a bunch of links for great places to find more information about it. Again, don't copy these down. I'll tweet out the slides later today, and you can go and check these out yourselves. I did do a 3-part series on Metacasts about it, and Rails, and straight up MiniTest, and then with Sinatra as well, using rack tests. So, if you're any Sinatra fans in the house? Yes, Sinatra for the win. So MiniTest and Sinatra are like, they're awesome. They just go so well together. And that is it. So thank you guys very much. We have some time for questions, and I'm sure there are some. So, looking forward. Thank you.